welcome everyone to a Clear Mountain interview. As you can see, I have the great good fortune to be here with the Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi. Bhante, thank you so much for allowing me to come and stay at Chuang Yen Monastery, where you live now. And I thought it would be just a horrible mistake if I wasn't to take up the opportunity to interview you and hear some thoughts. So I thought that maybe the theme we could take was Theravāda themes in translation.
Okay, that's a good idea.
Yeah. So basically going through some of your works. This isn't even...
Well, maybe we can try covering all of it in an hour or so.
Yeah, let's see what we can do. And basically with each work, we'll work somewhat sequentially, and which is also how you translated them.
Oh, I see. You've arranged the books sequentially.
In the order that you translated them.
Okay.
And then just pull out themes which are fascinating for translating Theravāda Buddhism, a Southeast Asian religion, into a Western language and Western concepts. So the first book to go into is actually just the appendix to this Life of Nyanatīloka Thera. The appendix which you wrote is a life sketch of Venerable Nyanaponika, who was your teacher. And I'm curious, one of the themes that I find fascinating about this is the relationship between a student and their teacher, and the value of gratitude and both katanyu and katavedi, so gratitude, thankfulness, and giving back. So could you speak to that at all, that this theme of gratitude in your relationship with Venerable Nyanamoli?
Well, it was Nyanaponika,
Nyanaponika, excuse me.
Okay. So it's easy to confuse one Nyana with another. Okay, I first met Venerable Nyanaponika during actually my early time in Sri Lanka. Venerable Nyanaponika was not my ordination teacher. I was ordained in Balangoda with an eminent Sri Lankan scholar monk named Venerable Balangoda Ananda Maitreya. And he was pretty much my early Pali teacher and Dhamma teacher. But I met Venerable Nyanaponika during maybe one of my first or second month as a samanera. I made a trip to the island hermitage. He was not living at the island hermitage at that time, and I didn't know that he would be there, but I knew that the island hermitage had a historical significance for Western monks, so I wanted to see the place, and so I visited it, and it was just by chance. It was in November, and Nyanaponika Thera was there because he had the practice of, after the Vasa, I think it was at Katina time, he would make a visit to his alma mater, to the island hermitage. And so when I arrived, he was there, and then we had some chats, and we felt a certain, I would say, a rapport. And then as I continued with my studies in Balangoda, when I had questions, I would write to him, because he, being a European, he would understand the Western way of thinking about Buddhism. And so we developed a certain closeness. And then I was in India in 1975 and looking for a place. I was planning to return to Sri Lanka. And I wrote to him about that, and he said, "You can come and stay here at the Forest Hermitage." And so I came, and then I stayed with him. And it was through that connection that this very close relationship developed. And then I went back to the United States in 1977. But then I came back to Sri Lanka in 1982. And then in 1984, I came to stay permanently at the Forest Hermitage with Venerable Nyanaponika. And I looked after him for the last 10.5 years of his life, right up to the day of his passing.
The life sketch in that book goes up detailing a lot of that, including that last morning when you were basically in the same building with him, and he passes away. And it's so touching that you spent the last 10 years of his life with him. It's kind of, unfortunately, very rare in a Western society to see that. And I think that speaks to, this relationship between a student and a teacher. Anything else you would like to draw out about that relationship? It's somewhat rare in the West.
Yeah, well, one feature when I was staying with him during the last, say, from about 1990 on, maybe the last 4 years of his life, his vision had been gradually deteriorating, but during the last 4 years of his life, his vision was virtually gone. I mean, he could see shapes in black and white. He lost the color vision and lost, precise focus in his vision. And so he couldn't read. And so generally every evening we would find books that would be of interest to him. And I would spend like about an hour reading to him out loud. And I would record the reading so at a later time he could listen to it on his own. Yeah, usually we had a subscription to Time magazine. So usually it would take like 2 evenings a week to go through the articles in Time that were of interest to him. And then the other 5 days of the week I would read from books to him.
That's so humanizing.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people, when they think of monks, especially Westerners, get a very austere, impersonal image in their head, but this is just so intimate. You reading to your teacher as he's going blind.
Yeah.
So
and then during the very last week or so of his life, actually 2 days before his passing, we pretty much took leave of each other. He knew that he was going to pass any day, and I knew that too. And so I said, for any faults I might have committed, please pardon me. And then he said he could speak only with difficulty. So he said, "Oh no, I'm so grateful to you for looking after me." And then it was fortunate we took leave on that day, because the next 2 days he would speak, but his voice was no longer intelligible. It's not that he was speaking unintelligible things, it's just that he couldn't, I guess the vocal cords or what's involved in the articulation of speech just didn't produce intelligible sounds. And then there was a German couple who was coming, and they would provide soup for him and sometimes stay with him for some time. So we thought maybe he could speak in German and they would understand. So we told them, please speak in German, the Nichis are here. And he spoke something, but again, they couldn't understand the German.
It's beautiful that your relationship with him continued even past when, part of what drew you to each other was the intellect. You were able to talk to each other about your, growing understandings of Buddhism, and it was largely like a matter of cognitively getting one's mind around Buddhism, and then even when that passed, you're still able to relate to him. And I think he'll play somewhat of a background or foreground role in the next several books that we'll go to. So, so the next book is The All-Embracing Net of Views, with the Digha Nikaya number 1 with its commentary. And I believe you did this when you were maybe 3 or 4 years in robes, which is fascinating. And also, you did this sort of at the behest of Venerable Nyanaponika, or?
Yeah, he didn't give me an order, you should translate that, but he said, I would really like it if somebody would translate the commentary and maybe parts of the sub-commentary to the Brahmacharya Sutta. So we have a compilation with the Sutta commentary and parts of the sub-commentary. And he had, probably in the late 1940s, I think, maybe in the earlier 1940s, maybe when he was in the internment camp in India, or maybe it was in the late 40s when he was back at Island Hermitage, he had translated portions of the commentary and the Tika, the sub-commentary, in a notebook. And he had given that to me at an earlier time when I was visiting him. And in that way, I had picked up the style of the commentaries and the sub-commentary. Of course, the sub-commentary style is very difficult. But in a way that his notebooks with selections from commentary and sub-commentary was my way of learning that style of Pali.
This brings up 2 themes which I think are really fascinating. One of them is just the contents of the Brahmacharya Sutta itself is all about what is the Dhamma and what is not the Dhamma. And then another theme is, the whole idea of commentaries. So with regards to the first theme of what's Dhamma and what is not, it's popular in America to have this kind of Buddhist romanticism where all paths lead to the top of the mountain.
Yeah.
And that's a large view of many who are just getting to know the Dhamma.
Yeah.
And so translating this would be somewhat, it could be seen as a challenge. So maybe touching on that theme first, how did you come to relate to this concept, which we find in the very first sutta of the first collection of the Sutta Pitaka, that there are things which are Dhamma, there are paths which are Dhamma, and some which are not. So.
Yeah, and I think that perhaps is the reason why the compilers of the Pali Canon put the Brahmacharya Sutta at the beginning of the Digha Nikaya, the first collection of discourses, though in the other collection or version that we have corresponding to the Digha Nikaya, this is the Dirghagama, preserved in Chinese translation. The Brahmacharya Sutta does not have that first place. In fact, offhand, I'm not sure whether it's in the Dirghagama or whether it's in the counterpart of the Majjhima Nikaya. But it doesn't have that first position. But I think the compilers of the Pali Sutta Pitaka put it at the beginning because it's a kind of guard dog at the entrance to the Dhamma. So if heretical views wearing monastic robes and with a shaved head try to slip through the gates, the guard dog will start barking. Woof, woof, woof. It'll sniff them out. View of self or no self.
Right.
View of creator God or no God.
Right.
If they detect creator God or view of self, then they start growling and baring their teeth.
Wow. So that I think I was weaned into like deeper and deeper and more kind of confrontational suttas slowly by reading just my own self-selection from Access to Insight at the time. But yeah, I mean, coming from a Unitarian background, which is very much ecumenical, take from any path, all paths are the same. Did you find it at all difficult? That's one question. And then how soon do you think people should start paying attention to and realizing that not every path makes it to the goal?
Yeah, to the first question, I didn't have any difficulty with the Digha Nikaya because I was trying to understand, clearly, like, what is the principle of the real Dhamma? And, I wasn't involved with the views affirming either theistic views or views that affirm a self, or popular now is sort of non-dualistic views affirming like one all-embracing reality. So those didn't correspond with my own inclinations, and I wanted to see, how the Buddha makes a sharp divide between what is genuine Dhamma and what are the false views or the wrong views that he rejects. And these are views that in the Brahmacharya seems to be views that were current in some form or another in the Indian intellectual, philosophical matrix of his time.
I mean, another feature of this and the next 3 books which you translated is that you don't just feature and translate the sutta, you translate its commentary by Buddhaghosa as well. And this is something else which is somewhat controversial in that you've got schools of Buddhism, traditional Theravada in Southeast Asia that basically take anything that Buddhaghosa says, these commentaries say, is the Dhamma. This is, you need to take every jot and tittle, every tiny bit. And then you've got schools which are almost like Protestant Buddhism, which just go only back to the suttas and reject everything that Buddhaghosa says. How did you come to have this, or what's your relationship with the commentaries, and how do you suggest that other people relate to the commentaries, Westerners especially?
Yeah, well, my own sort of attitude has been, I would call it maybe a middle way with regard to the commentaries. Like, I see like many like valuable, important elaborations of the material in the suttas, and many quite new ideas that are introduced in the commentaries, which are still in accord with the Dhamma, but provide maybe more panoramic perspectives and then finer, more detailed, more granular perspectives on some of the doctrines that we see in the Sutta Pitaka. But I don't take the attitude of grasp a kind of fundamentalist attitude towards the commentaries, saying that the commentaries are infallible and absolutely correct, but one sometimes has to look, critically at the commentaries and be able to discern what is acceptable, what is unacceptable. I'm trying to think offhand what is unacceptable. I mean, occasionally, like I would find like some explanations of points, passages that I think, see, what the commentary is often doing is taking the kind of systematic presentation of the Dhamma that one finds in the Abhidhamma, and then reading those ideas into the suttas. And so what I would say is that perhaps that kind of explanation of the commentary can be accepted, but not in an exclusive way or in a totalistic way, like it's providing an elaboration from a particular perspective, an elaboration in line and determined by the particular system through which the commentary is reading the suttas. But it would seem to me, unfortunately, we don't have, or at least I don't think we have, something like the Sarvastivada commentaries or the Mahasanghika commentaries on, say, the Sutta Pitaka. If we did, we might see elaborations of the same sutta, but from the standpoint of the systematic exegetical framework of the Sarvastivada school or the Mahasanghika school or the Dharmaguptaka school.
Yeah, that seems like such a reasonable and pragmatic approach to the commentaries that I am surprised at the rather dogmatic extremes with which Westerners either reject or seem...
Usually it's the elder generation of Asian monks, maybe particularly the Burmese, who are very set on the infallible reliability of the commentaries.
So the next work which you translated similar is another sutta and its commentary. This is the Mahanidana Sutta and its commentary. So this is Diga.
Actually, I think you skipped over the Mula Pariyaya, which came next in the sequence.
Right. We weren't able to find that this morning, which is, Bhante has written so much that this is only, a small portion of what he's translated. But was there anything you would like to draw out about the Mula Pariyaya? So that you had...
well, I also did the Mula Pariyaya because it was pointed out to me, or some people in Sri Lanka, more scholarly people, were saying that this is called the Mula Pariyaya, the discourse on the root, because it's it's extremely important. It lays out the real key to understanding the Buddha's system, but from a different perspective, a different way from the Brahmajala Sutta. So the Brahmajala Sutta, it focuses almost entirely on distorted views, speculative philosophical views, where the Mula Pariyaya Sutta focuses more precisely on ways of thinking, conceiving, and interpreting the perceptual experience.
What do you think about, so one principle in that, the word manyati plays a big role in that, so conceiving, and manyati in that sutta is always kind of a way of conceiving which is bound up with self. And one related principle not in that sutta is the phrase "yeni yeni hi manyanti tatotang hoti
Yeah.
anyatati." Whatever way one conceives it, the truth is ever other than that. Has that epistemological humility played a role in the way that you've understood the Dhamma, or would encourage it for others? Or
epistemological humility. Yeah, okay. You see, the word manyati sort of has a loaded meaning. It's not just ordinary conceptualization, which is not problematic in itself. The problem is in conceiving that these are conceptions which are driven by and which embody, the way the commentary explains it, conceptions governed by, driven by craving, conceit, and wrong views. And so those are the conceivings or ideas that revolve around the notions through craving, the notion of mine, or the drive to make things mine by appropriating things and grasping and drawing to oneself. And then the conceiving, driven by conceit, revolves around the idea of I am better, I am equal, I am inferior, or simply I am, the asmimana, the conceit I am. And then the conceiving, governed by the tendency to views, it could manifest at a coarse level in all of the views of the Brahmacharya Sutta, and at a subtler level in Sakaya Ditti, the sort of subtle underlying view of a self, the instinctive or inherent view of self.
Seems like a really good encouragement to be careful of one's own conceivings, and to be sensitive to whether one's coming from this place of views or wrong view, craving, conceit.
But it doesn't entail that whatever one conceives or whatever one thinks, the truth is other than that. If that were the case, one could never arrive at a correct understanding of the nature of
math would
reality.
Be really hard. Yeah.
Excuse me?
Math would be very hard.
Math would be hard, but in the Buddhist context, you conceive impermanence, but then if the truth is other than that, then things are permanent. If you conceive dukkha, things are really blissful. If you conceive non-self, then there's a real self.
Very good point. So, moving on, this is the next set of sutta and commentary that you translated, Digha Nikaya number 14 or something?
It's 15,
15, Mahanidana Sutta.
Yeah.
And two themes that I wanted to draw out of this are, the first is regarding, in here this is basically a large, long elaboration of dependent origination. And many Westerners learn about dependent origination, which talks about the cause of suffering coming from birth, and we're apt to understand that in psychological terms, which are true. But how would you advise someone, how do you see this 3 life versus 1 life interpretation of dependent origination, and how do you encourage or suggest that other people appreciate it within your understanding of the Buddha, the Theravāda Buddha Dhamma, which is vast?
Did you say that birth and old age and death have psychological?
Yeah. I mean, that's, you can say every moment, I'm being reborn, and then there's the death of the ego.
But I don't think that is the actual meaning of birth, old age, and death in the formula for dependent origination, because there are suttas which define what is meant by birth. And it's pretty clear that it's biological, well, actually beginning with biological conception in the womb, and then culminating in the biological birth, the parturition, separation from the womb. And old age is described very clearly as getting gray hair, the wrinkling of the skin, the teeth start to break, one becomes weak, the faculties lose their efficacy. And then death is described very clearly as, the laying down of the body, the breakup of the aggregates. Yeah, so I mean, the aim of the Buddha's teaching, you have to say dependent origination against the aim of the Buddha's teaching, which is breaking the cycle of repeated birth and death. And so what I find, a lot of people or Westerners are attracted to dependent origination, maybe because it seems a bit enigmatic and tantalizing and intellectually stimulating, but they might have doubts and skepticism about the reality of rebirth, or they have outright reject the idea of rebirth, so they want to have deep 12-link dependent origination without rebirth, which is a little bit like trying to have your cake and eat it at the same time. Because here is clear birth, old age, and death are physical, biological birth, old age, and death, and the aim of the teaching, the ultimate aim, is liberation from the cycle of repeated birth, old age, and death. And the Buddha has to show how that can be done, how one could reach liberation from birth, old age, and death. The Buddha has to show the causal dynamics that underlie the process of repeated existence. And the only formula that lays out in somewhat detail, systematically and clearly, those particular dynamics is the formula of dependent origination.
In a three life.
In the three life. I think, there's some contend that there's no suttas in which the Buddha says these factors belong to the past, these to the present, these to the future. I think there are several reasons for this, though that would almost require a little lecture to go through it. But one reason is that the threefold temporal division of dependent origination applies in all time periods. So if you say that these factors are the present, those are the past, then it seems that ignorance and volitional activities occurred in the earlier life, not in this life, and that birth, old age, and death are going to occur in a future life, not in this life. But to see, the way I see it, that the Buddha makes this three-life distinction in dependent origination. I call it an expository device for showing the dynamics that underlie the cycle of repeated birth and death. So you get to understand the way these 12 factors really work. This is where the Patisambhida Magga becomes useful, which says that when you have ignorance and volitional activities, there's also craving, clinging, and karmic existence. And then when you have feeling, where does it go?
Upadana.
Consciousness, name and form, feeling, contact, consciousness, name and form, the 6 sense spaces, contact and feeling, those 5 factors, those 5 are subject to birth, old age, and death. And so in this way, you have 5 factors in the past, producing 5 factors in the present, and then the same 5 factors from the past are in the present, producing the same 5 factors in the future.
I'll see if I can put on there's a very good chart of that I know of in the book Buddha Dhamma. Something else I wanted to draw up from this translation of the commentary and the sub-commentary to the Mahanidana Sutta is that part of the sub-commentary is a work which you've translated there and separately as its own book called The Treatise on the Parami by the sub-commentator named Dhammapala. And it is such a good work. And I think one interesting theme to draw out from that is a lot of Theravadins, especially convert Theravadins, are just so gung-ho and they feel that, we're the real Buddhism. There's this Theravada conceit. And we think that, there's this hermetic seal around Theravada that, okay, we're Theravada and there's no interaction between Mahayana. But this sutta goes into the parami, the spiritual perfections. And could you talk to this theme of the relationship between a goal of arhatship versus a goal of being a Buddha.
Yeah. I've always found rather puzzling and problematic is that in the suttas, one doesn't find the Buddha explicitly expounding a bodhisattva path to Buddhahood, and one doesn't find anybody coming to the Buddha and saying, Bhante, I have the deepest veneration for the arhats, but you are like the teacher of the world, the supreme, fully enlightened one in the world. And your task sort of is to liberate countless humans and devas. So I aspire to become a Buddha.
Mm-hmm.
How do I go about doing it?
Mm-hmm.
And you would think that things like that would have taken place in the Buddha's time.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, at a certain period, probably this was part of the pre-Mahayana landscape, the period that bridges what we call archaic Buddhism and the emergence of Mahayana Buddhism. In the different Buddhist schools, the thinkers, the doctrinal specialists were pondering that issue, maybe largely based on the Jataka stories of what is the course that the Buddha followed to become a fully enlightened Buddha. And so a bodhisattva ideal eventually emerged, probably in all of the schools, even in the Theravada, maybe in some texts that are incorporated into the Pali Canon, into the Sutta Pitaka, the Buddha Vangsa and the Charya Pitaka. But then at a later time, this would be the period of the later commentaries and sub-commentaries, maybe 6th century, 7th century. The commentator Dhammapala composed this treatise on the paramis. The idea of paramis actually emerged in the Theravada school earlier. We find it already in the Buddha Vangsa, I think in the Charya Pitaka, but I'm not sure. But definitely in the Buddha Vangsa, which maybe is 1st century BC, 2nd century, 1st century BC. But Dhammapada elaborated on the concept of the paramis and provided detailed explanations of how one aspires to follow each paramita or parami and how one puts it into practice. And what I found of interest with doing this, I was puzzled by the very definitive tone that Dhammapala was using when he was describing some of these practices and the requirements for getting the prophecy or the prediction of future success from a Buddha, the aspirations and so on. I was wondering, where is that coming from? And then I found in the library, I think this was in Colombo, in the Vajirarama Monastery, first a book called The Bodhisattva Concept in Sanskrit Literature by an Indian scholar. And then I found some of passages that were similar to those in the treatise on the paramitas in that book by the Indian scholar, and he would reference the Yogacara Bhumi, which is one of the major works of the the Mahayana Yogacara school. And then I found also in the Vajra library a Sanskrit copy of the Yogacara Bhumi in Roman script, and I was able to read, at least to some extent, Sanskrit. And so I looked through the Yogacara Bhumi and I found those passages in there. And so it became clear to me what happened. And the wording was just so similar. It couldn't be that they were just drawing, the two sources drawing from a common source, but that Dhammapala was was familiar with the Yogacara Bhumi and was drawing these passages from it and incorporating them into his treatise on the paramis. And this leads to a situation where some years ago, this was a Taiwanese nun told me that the like the senior Theravadan monks who read the commentaries become familiar with that treatise on the paramis and take it, this is the pure, unadulterated Theravadan doctrine. So they come to Taiwan sometimes and conduct retreats, and then at the end of the retreat they give a discourse on, now you're returning to the worldly life, so what do? You have to cultivate the paramis, and they'll give some talks on the paramis. So the nun told me, here we have the very traditional Burmese Theravadan monks coming to Taiwan and teaching us Mahayana Buddhism.
Yeah, I'm very
It's in the commentary to the Brahmacharya Sutta.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it's not the Mahanidana Sutta.
Okay. So all of the books we've discussed so far are available for free distribution, both from BPS, the Buddhist Publication Society, of which you were the editor for 20 plus years. And so, people can find all these on the internet. Definitely recommend that treatise on the parami. One thing I found really inspiring was that going back to the Pali, these are words, like all of the Pali words are pretty much, words which are in the oldest strata of the canon. So I'm just finding these fascinating and wonderful similes and causational loops for how to cultivate generosity to the umpth degree. And it's just very inspiring. It just makes generosity precepts, renunciation, wisdom, energy, etc. It just gives encouragement to do that. And I didn't feel that it was necessarily had to be Mahayana.
And you said that these books are available from the BPS in Sri Lanka, but several of them have been published in North America by Pariyatti, and so they can be ordered from within North America.
That's fascinating, and people should do that. These are...
I think Pariyatti, are they based in Washington State?
Or in Alaska.
It's in Washington State.
This next book, also by BPS, is another one of these sutta and commentary, The Fruits of Recluseship, Digha Nikaya number 2, and its commentaries. And the theme that I wanted to draw out of this one is the value of a monastic. So that's the whole contents of this. And actually this book, I found it in the small library of a Goenka center. So like I went to Goenka, I didn't even know he was teaching Theravada because he's so ecumenical in the way he teaches things, which was great. I didn't want a religion at the time. But then once I'm super into the meditation, I find this little library, which is almost hidden at the Shelburne Falls, I think, or maybe the Canadian Center. And I find this book and I'm like, wow, this is it. And monks, like this is the path. And so it really was very influential for me. But it is something which I think modern secular Buddhists, they could see that they might think that the role, the archetype of a monk is baggage, from an Asian context that can just be dispensed with, We have modern problems now, and it's almost negligent for someone to leave the world, So what do you feel, could you draw out this theme of the value of renunciant?
Well, I think we have to recognize that, first let me take the position of this book within, I call it the Bhikkhu Bodhi Quartet. So the Brahmacharya, Mula Pariyaya, and the Mahanidana, those three deal very much with doctrinal issues, with sort of, say, theoretical issues of understanding, proper discernment, discrimination of what is the true Dhamma, what are the principles of the Dhamma. And then the fourth volume in that series deals with the practice, with the implementation of the path. How does one reach the goal that is pointed to in the other three volumes, that liberation of the mind through non-clinging. And then the particular function of the monastic, we have to remember, that the Buddha Dhamma was transmitted for 2,500 years. I deeply appreciate the lay practitioners, earnest, dedicated, devoted, sincere, knowledgeable lay practitioners. But the Buddha Dhamma was not transmitted for 2,500 years by a community of lay practitioners, by a lay, quote, Sangha.
Mm-hmm.
The Buddha gave the charge for preserving and transmitting the Dhamma. He didn't call Anathapindika, Visakha, and Chita the householder and say, come to the monastery, entrusting the Dhamma to you. It's your job to preserve and transmit the Dhamma. No, he said, bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, that's your job. And that's how it's worked through 2,500 years, whether in South Asia, East Asia, excepting Japan, or Northern Himalayan region. It's been the monastics that have preserved the Dhamma because they are the ones first who can specialize in really studying the Dhamma in detail and in depth, and who have, at least in theory, the appropriate conditions for practicing it and embodying that quality. Don't forget that the goal of the Buddha of the Buddha Dhamma is an ultimate renunciation, an ultimate relinquishment, and adopting the monastic form is, you could say, a provisional or preparatory or expedient renunciation aimed at the ultimate renunciation. And so the Dhamma is always pointing in the direction of relinquishing and renunciation, and the monastic form, in principle at least, is based on renunciation and encourages renunciation.
Somewhat of a follow-up question is a theme of the accessibility of jhana. So like one thing that it said that a monk is able to do is get this kaya viveka, this bodily seclusion, so as to be able to get the mental seclusion necessary for the jhanas, these mental absorptions. And I'm curious if you wanted to just say anything about that, like how, because there are modern teachers who teach jhana retreats, and you can pay $1,500 and then go on a week-long retreat, and they have statistics about how many people attain jhana within that week. And I don't know, just to draw maybe a little bit on this point of what, in your understanding of the Theravāda Pali explanation of jhana, how accessible is it for someone who's living a normal American life with a job and etc.?
Yeah, well, of course, as we see in the text, a sort of prerequisite for attaining the jhanas is we have vivijeva kamehi, so detached or secluded from sensual pleasures, and then vivicha akusalehi dhammehi, secluded from unwholesome mental states, and those unwholesome mental states are taken to be the 5 hindrances. And so we could say that the first vivijeva kamehi is pointing in the direction of bodily seclusion, so it is not constantly exposed to sensually enticing objects. And vivicha akusalehi dhammehi is pointing to seclusion from the inner unwholesome states, the 5 hindrances. And so the monastic form provides good conditions for that kind of seclusion. But what seems to me to be the case, I can't make judgments about particular people, but it seems that people's ability to succeed in meditation, whether in the practice of samatha or the practice of vipassana, is very much determined by past background, by accumulations of merit and past paramis. And so I've heard of cases of lay people even just going on short retreats and getting quick success in their samatha and being able to attain jhanas. And I don't think that they're necessarily sort of overrating themselves and boasting about attainments that they haven't attained. Where I know many monks, and I have to include myself in that category, who strive pretty diligently, but can't claim to reach high levels of attainment either in samatha or vipassana. So this depends very much on karmic conditions, as I said, past paramis. But I would say for one aiming for the jhanas, even lay people to be able, if with those paramis, for those paramis to be activated and to propel them into those higher states, they adopt a, a situation, a condition which is modeled on that of monastic life. You know, if they're at home with the wife and children, coming home after an 8-hour job, it would be extremely difficult, even if they have a mountain of paramis to attain the jhanas or the insight knowledges, paths, and fruits. But if they have those accumulations and then they go on a month-long retreat, then those paramis can be catalyzed and manifested and spill out in the form of their attainments.
And add Facebook and Instagram and YouTube to their wife and children, and it's all the more difficult.
Yeah, but then the thing that always worries me is when on Facebook I went on a retreat with so-and-so, got the third jhana, still doing some work to get to the fourth.
Yeah.
And then I've heard cases of even lay people living at home, working, claiming to attain arhatship, and then after attaining arhatship, getting married.
Yeah, such a circumscribed and I think wise answer to that. So Bhante and I ended up talking for about an hour and 40 minutes. So we're actually going to split this into 2 parts, and this is the first part in our series on Theravāda Themes in translation with Bhikkhu Bodhi.